Before we begin, make sure to like this video, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe for more haunted histories, dark legends, and stories that blur the line between fact and fear. There are haunted houses. And then there is Amityville, a quiet home on Long Island. A large Dutch colonial house with white walls, dark windows, and a waterfront view that should have made it feel peaceful. But for decades, this house has carried a reputation unlike almost any other in America. To some, it is the site of a horrifying true crime. To others, it is the birthplace of one of the most famous paranormal cases ever recorded. And to skeptics, it is something else entirely. A legend built from tragedy, media obsession, and the human need to make sense of evil. But no matter what you believe, the Amityville house has become a symbol. A symbol of the moment when a normal suburban home stopped feeling safe. A symbol of the idea that a house can remember. And a symbol of the terrifying question that has followed this story for nearly half a century. Was something already inside that house? Or did the horror begin with the people who lived there? Long before the name Amityville became connected to demons, murders, and whispered hauntings, it was simply a village on the south shore of Long Island, New York. A waterside community with docks, boats, family homes, and quiet streets. It was the kind of place where people came to raise children, retire peacefully, and live close to the water. The house that would become infamous stood at 112 Ocean Avenue. It was built in the early 20th century, designed in a Dutch colonial style, with a gambrel roof and distinctive quarter-round windows on the upper floor. Those windows would later become one of the most recognizable features of the house. In photographs, they looked almost like eyes. Dark, watchful, and strangely alive. But in the beginning, there was nothing supernatural attached to the property. No headlines, no movies, no books, just a family home. A beautiful house in a wealthy neighborhood. A place that seemed to represent success, comfort, and stability. But the legend of Amityville did not begin with ghosts. It began with blood. In the 1960s and 1970s, the house became home to the DeFeo family. There was Ronald DeFeo Sr., known as Big Ronnie, a strict and sometimes intimidating father. His wife, Louise, was described by many as elegant, religious, and devoted to her children. Together, they had 5 children: Dawn, Allison, Mark, John Matthew, and Ronald DeFeo Jr., often called Butch. From the outside, the DeFeos appeared to be a successful suburban family. They had money, they had a large home, they had cars, neighbors, and the appearance of a comfortable life. But inside the home, according to later accounts, the family dynamic was far more troubled. Ronald DeFeo Jr. had a complicated relationship with his father. There were reports of conflict, anger, and tension. Butch struggled with drugs, arguments, and instability. And as the years went on, whatever darkness lived inside him seemed to grow. Still, no one in Amityville could have predicted what would happen in that house. No neighbor could have imagined that the quiet home on Ocean Avenue would soon become the center of one of the most disturbing crimes in American history. In the early morning hours of November 13, 1974, the DeFeo family was asleep. The house was still. The neighborhood was quiet. Inside the home, 6 members of the family were in their beds. Ronald DeFeo Sr., Louise DeFeo, Dawn DeFeo, Allison DeFeo, Mark DeFeo, John Matthew DeFeo. All of them were killed. Each had been shot with a rifle. The murders were brutal, sudden, and deeply unsettling. What made the crime even more disturbing was the way the victims were found. Many of them appeared to have been lying in their beds when they died. There were no clear signs of a major struggle. Neighbors did not report hearing the kind of chaos that such a crime should have created. No screaming, no desperate pounding on doors, no frantic calls for help. That detail would later become one of the seeds of the legend. How could 6 people be murdered in one house without the rest waking up? How could a rifle be fired repeatedly in a quiet neighborhood without drawing immediate attention? Those questions became part of the mystery, and like many mysteries surrounding violent crimes, where facts left gaps, folklore began to grow. Later that evening, Ronald DeFeo Jr. entered a local bar in distress, claiming his family had been shot. At first, he said the murders were connected to organized crime, but that story did not hold. Eventually, investigators focused on him. And soon, Ronald DeFeo Jr. confessed. He was charged, tried, and convicted for the murders of his family. The legal case found him responsible. But even before the paranormal stories began, something about the crimes seemed to haunt people. Not in the supernatural sense, in a deeper, more human way. A family wiped out in their sleep. A son accused of destroying his own household. A beautiful home transformed overnight into a crime scene. The horror was already real. And that is what makes Amityville different from many ghost stories. The legend does not begin with a shadow in a hallway. It begins with 6 bodies in a house by the water. After the DeFeo killings, the house stood under a cloud. The physical structure remained the same. The walls were still there. The windows still faced the street. The rooms were cleaned. The property was eventually put up for sale. But a house can be repaired more easily than a reputation. Everyone knew what had happened there. The address had entered the local imagination. Even before the Lutz family arrived, 112 Ocean Avenue was no longer just a house. It was the DeFeo house, the murder house, the place where something unthinkable had happened. And that alone can change how people experience a space. A creaking floorboard no longer sounds ordinary. A dark bedroom no longer feels empty. A cold room is not just a cold room. Once a house has been touched by tragedy, every silence inside it feels heavier. Then, a little over a year after the murders, a new family moved in. And that is when Amityville changed from true crime into legend. In December of 1975, George and Kathleen Lutz purchased the house. With them came Kathy's 3 children from a previous marriage. The home was large, beautiful, and surprisingly affordable because of its history. For many families, that would have been enough reason to stay away. But George and Kathy saw something else. They saw a chance, a fresh start, a waterfront home at a price they could manage. They knew about the murders. There was no escaping that. But knowing a house has a dark past is different from believing the past is still present. The Lutz family moved into 112 Ocean Avenue on December 18, 1975. They brought their belongings, they brought their hopes. They brought their family into a place already marked by death. According to the now famous story, strange things began almost immediately. At first, they were small, subtle. The kind of things a person might dismiss if they happened once. A feeling of being watched, sudden cold spots, odd smells, a sense of unease that seemed to settle into the walls. But the Lutz family would later claim that the activity grew stronger, and stranger, and more terrifying. One of the earliest details in the Amityville haunting story involves the house itself seeming to resist the family's presence. Doors reportedly opened and closed, windows slammed, rooms felt icy cold even when the weather did not explain it. George Lutz, according to the legend, began waking up around 3:15 in the morning. That time became one of the most famous details in the Amityville story. It was believed to be close to the time when the DeFeo murders occurred. Whether coincidence, psychological suggestion, or something else entirely, the hour became symbolic. 3:15 a.m., the dead hour of the house, a time when the normal world seemed to thin, a time when memory, guilt, fear, and the unexplained seemed to gather in the dark. George allegedly became obsessed with keeping the fireplace burning. He complained of feeling cold. Not just ordinary winter cold, but a cold that seemed to come from inside the house. A cold that no fire could truly chase away. Kathy reportedly felt an unseen presence. The children were said to experience strange events as well. But perhaps the most famous part of the Lutz family's story was the entity known as Jody. According to the lore, one of the Lutz children began speaking of an imaginary friend named Jody. At first, that might not seem unusual. Children create imaginary friends all the time, but Jody was described in ways that made the story far more disturbing. Jody was said to have red eyes. Jody was said to be capable of changing shape. In some versions of the story, Jody appeared as something pig-like, not quite an animal, not quite a person, something that belonged to neither category. There are accounts of glowing red eyes seen outside the house. There are accounts of a presence watching from the darkness. There are stories of Jody being more than a child's fantasy, more than a coping mechanism, more than imagination. In the mythology of Amityville, Jody became the house's most memorable presence. Not a traditional ghost, not a murdered child in white, not a figure drifting through hallways. Jody was stranger than that, a creature, a familiar, a face for whatever force the Lutz family believed had attached itself to the home. The image of red eyes staring through the dark has become one of the defining symbols of the Amityville haunting. Because eyes suggest intelligence, they suggest awareness, they suggest that whatever is in the dark is not just present, it is looking back. As the story continued, the haunting allegedly escalated. The Lutz family described foul odors appearing without explanation. They spoke of mysterious stains. They claimed greenish slime appeared in the house. They described objects moving. They described unseen forces. They described a home that seemed less like a building and more like a living thing. One of the most unsettling parts of the legend is the idea that the house began affecting George Lutz personally. He reportedly became withdrawn, irritable, and increasingly fixated on the cold. His behavior, in some tellings, seemed to echo a kind of possession or influence. The fear was not just that the house had ghosts. The fear was that the house could change people, that it could reach into their minds, that it could take ordinary frustration, grief, anger, and anxiety and twist them into something dangerous. This idea connects the Lutz haunting back to the DeFeo murders. Could Ronald DeFeo Jr. have been influenced by something in the house? That question became one of the central pillars of the Amityville myth. DeFeo himself gave conflicting explanations over time. At one point, he claimed he heard voices telling him to kill. For believers in the haunting, this detail became chilling. For skeptics, it was the statement of a murderer trying to explain or deflect the horror of his actions. But for the legend, it became fuel. The possibility that the house had not merely witnessed evil, but produced it. Another major part of the Amityville lore involves a priest who was asked to bless the house. In the famous version of the story, the priest entered the home and felt something malevolent. While blessing one of the rooms, he allegedly heard a voice command him to leave. The phrase associated with this moment became one of the most iconic lines in paranormal history. Get out. Whether literal, embellished, or disputed, the idea was powerful. A priest enters a murder house. He attempts to cleanse it. And something inside answers. Not with a whisper of grief, not with a plea for help, but with a command. Leave. That moment helped shape the Amityville story into something larger than a simple ghost tale. This was not described as a confused spirit wandering the place where it died. This was described as a hostile presence, a force with intention, a force that did not want prayer, cleansing, or human occupation. It wanted the house, or it wanted the people inside it. The Lutz family lasted only 28 days in the Amityville house. On January 14, 1976, they left. According to the story, they fled in terror, leaving many possessions behind. 28 days, less than a month. That brief timeline is part of what made the case so compelling. Most haunted house stories unfold slowly over years. A door opens once, A whisper is heard in a hallway. A shadow is seen over a staircase. But the Amityville story was different. It was compressed, violent, intense. A family moves in. A haunting erupts. They flee less than a month later. The short duration made the story feel urgent, almost cinematic. It also made people ask whether something truly extraordinary had happened. What could make a family abandon a large, expensive home so quickly? What could make them leave furniture, clothing, and personal belongings behind? Was it fear? Was it stress? Was it the overwhelming pressure of living in a murder house? Or was it something inhuman? The Lutz family's departure turned the house into a national mystery, and soon their story would leave Long Island and enter American pop culture forever. In 1977, author Jay Anson published The Amityville Horror. The book presented the Lutz family's experiences as a true story. It became a sensation. Readers were captivated by the idea that a suburban home could contain a demonic force. The story had everything: a real murder case, a beautiful house, a family under siege, a priestly warning, a hidden evil, and a ticking clock of 28 days. The book transformed Amityville from a local tragedy into a national phenomenon. Then came the films. The 1979 movie adaptation turned the house into an image recognized around the world. Those dark upper windows became iconic. The name Amityville became shorthand for the haunted house itself, not just a location, a brand of fear. For millions of people, the story was no longer just about the DeFeos or the Lutz family. It became a myth about the American home, the place that is supposed to be safest, the place where the door locks, the family gathers, and the outside world is kept away. Amityville suggested the opposite. It suggested that the danger might already be inside the walls, inside the basement, inside the family, inside the mind. No telling of Amityville is complete without the controversy. From the beginning, the story was challenged. Skeptics, investigators, journalists, and later residents questioned the claims. Some argued that the haunting was exaggerated. Others argued it was fabricated. There were disputes over the priest's account. There were questions about whether certain events could have happened as described. There were claims that the Lutz family's story had been shaped for publicity, legal strategy, or financial gain. The house's later owners did not report the same paranormal activity. Some residents became frustrated by curiosity seekers, tourists, and horror fans who came to stare at the property. Eventually, the address was changed. The house itself was remodeled. The famous quarter-round windows were replaced. The goal seemed clear: make the house look less like the legend, give it back some normalcy, let it become a home again. But legends are not easy to renovate. You can change windows, you can change numbers, you can repaint walls. But once a place enters the public imagination, it exists in two worlds at once. There is the physical house in Amityville, and then there is the Amityville house. The one people picture when they hear the name. The one with glowing eyes. The one where a voice says, "Get out." The one where a family lasted 28 days. So why has Amityville lasted? Why does this case still fascinate people decades later? Part of it is the true crime. The DeFeo murders were real. 6 people died in that house. That fact gives the story a gravity many haunted legends do not have. Even if someone rejects every paranormal claim, the house is still connected to something deeply horrific. Another reason is the timing. The 1970s were a powerful era for supernatural fear in American culture. Stories of possession, demons, occult forces, and haunted homes were everywhere. People were fascinated by the possibility that evil could be invisible, that it could attach itself to ordinary lives, that it could hide behind suburban doors. Amityville arrived at exactly the right moment. It spoke to fears already growing in the culture: fear of family breakdown, fear of hidden violence, fear of spiritual corruption, fear that the safe, successful American home might be an illusion. The house was not a castle on a hill. It was not an ancient ruin. It was not buried deep in the woods. It was a suburban home. That made it worse. Because if it could happen there, it could happen anywhere. There is something uniquely disturbing about a haunted house story connected to a real address. A ghost in an unnamed mansion feels distant. A demon in a fictional town feels contained. But Amityville was specific. A street, a number, a house you could find on a map. That specificity made the legend feel reachable. People could drive past it. People could photograph it. People could stand outside and wonder what happened behind those walls. And many did. The house became an attraction, whether the residents wanted that or not. Curiosity seekers came looking for proof. Horror fans came looking for a thrill. Believers came looking for energy. Skeptics came looking for contradiction. But all of them came because the story had done something powerful. It had turned architecture into mythology. A staircase was no longer just a staircase. A bedroom was no longer just a bedroom. A basement was no longer just a basement. Every room became part of a narrative. Every window became a witness. Every shadow became a possibility. The question remains: was the Amityville house truly haunted? There are several ways to answer. If haunting means documented paranormal activity that can be proven beyond dispute, then Amityville remains contested. The evidence is debated. The accounts conflict. The story has been challenged many times. But if haunting means a place marked by trauma, memory, fear, and cultural obsession, then Amityville is undeniably haunted. It is haunted by the DeFeo family. It is haunted by the image of 6 people murdered in their beds. It is haunted by the Lutz family's claims. It is haunted by books, movies, interviews, lawsuits, investigations, and decades of speculation. It is haunted by the millions of people who have imagined what it would feel like to stand inside that house at 3:15 in the morning. Sometimes a haunting is not only about ghosts. Sometimes it is about what a story does to a place, and what a place does to everyone who hears the story. Every haunted house legend needs a heart, a place where the fear concentrates. For Amityville, that place is often the basement. In the lore, the basement carried a special sense of dread. It was below the family rooms, below the bedrooms, below the surface of normal life. Basements already have a psychological power. They are buried spaces, places of storage, darkness, pipes, furnaces, and old smells. They are where houses hide what does not belong upstairs. In the Amityville story, the basement became more than a lower level. It became a symbol of the hidden thing beneath the home, the thing underneath the family, the thing underneath the story, the thing underneath the American dream. Some versions of the lore include a small red room, sometimes described as a strange hidden space. This room became another disturbing element of the legend. Whether interpreted as real, exaggerated, or symbolic, it gave the story a focal point. A secret chamber. A forbidden space. A place in the house that seemed to suggest the building had a hidden anatomy. As if the house had organs. As if it had a heart. And that heart was not beating with life. It was beating with memory. One of the most difficult parts of Amityville is the way the paranormal legend grew out of real deaths. The DeFeo family were not characters in a horror story. They were real people. Their deaths became the foundation of a supernatural narrative that turned their home into a global symbol. That creates a tension at the center of the case. The haunting made the house famous, but the murders made it tragic. Without the murders, the Lutz story likely would not have carried the same force. Without the Lutz story, the murders may have remained a terrible local crime rather than a global legend. Together, they created something that neither story would have become alone, a true crime case fused with a demonic haunting, a family massacre followed by claims of supernatural infestation. That fusion is why Amityville remains so powerful. It does not ask people to fear a ghost in isolation. It asks them to consider whether evil leaves a residue, whether violence can stain a place, whether a home can absorb terror, and whether the next people who enter might feel what happened before them. Today, the Amityville house still exists, though it no longer looks exactly like the famous version from the books and films. It has been renovated. Its address has been changed. Its owners have generally sought privacy. For them, it is not a legend. It is a property, a residence, a place to live. But for the public, the name Amityville still carries weight. Say it aloud, and people immediately understand the atmosphere. Dark windows, a murder scene, a fleeing family, a supernatural warning, a house that seems to watch. That is the power of folklore. It survives remodeling. It survives skepticism. It survives time. Even when details are questioned, the emotional truth of the story remains potent. A house can look normal from the outside and still contain something unbearable within. The real reason Amityville stays with us may not be the ghosts. It may not even be the murders alone. The deeper fear is that we cannot truly know the places we live. We move into homes after other families have left. We sleep in rooms where strangers once slept. We paint walls without knowing what they have seen. We walk across floors that may have held grief, rage, illness, secrets, and death. Most of the time, we never think about it. A house is just a house, until something reminds us that every home has a past. Amityville takes that ordinary idea and turns it into horror. What if a home's past does not stay past? What if trauma lingers? What if walls remember the voices that once echoed through them? What if the rooms we trust most are the ones that know the most about us? That is why the story works. Not because everyone believes every claim, but because the fear underneath it is universal. The fear that safety is fragile. The fear that evil can wear a familiar face. The fear that a house can become a trap. The Amityville story has been retold, challenged, adapted, parodied, investigated, and debated for decades. Each retelling changes it slightly. Some versions focus on the Defio murders. Some focus on the Lutz family. Some emphasize demonic activity. Some emphasize hoax allegations. Some treat the house as a cursed object. Others treat it as a mirror for American fear. But all versions return to the same image. A house by the water. A family murdered in the night. Another family fleeing less than a month after moving in. And a name that refuses to fade. Amityville. It sounds peaceful at first. Almost gentle. A village name. A place name. But after everything connected to it, the word feels different. It feels like a door left open in the dark. In the end, the Amityville house may be one of the most complicated haunted locations in America. Not because its ghost story is universally accepted, but because the truth beneath the legend is already horrifying. 6 people were killed there. A family later claimed they were driven out by something they could not explain. A book and film franchise turned the house into an icon, and the world has been arguing ever since. Maybe the Amityville haunting was supernatural. Maybe it was psychological. Maybe it was grief, fear, suggestion, and media myth colliding inside one infamous address. But one thing is certain. The house became more than wood, brick, glass, and paint. It became a warning that some places do not let go of what happened inside them, that some stories grow stronger in the dark, and that sometimes the most terrifying thing about a haunted house is not what might be inside, it is what already happened there, and what we are still willing to believe. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of the Amityville house, like the video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories from the darkest corners of haunted history. Amityville remains powerful because it combines real tragedy, disputed paranormal claims, and a setting that feels disturbingly ordinary. Whether viewed as a haunting, a media phenomenon, or a true crime legend, its story continues to endure because it turns the idea of home into something uncertain, watchful, and unforgettable.